Good afternoon, participants and colleagues. I know it's been a long day. You have been going through a number of modules the whole morning. We just kept the best for last. So this one would be the best module. I have a number of panelists that we are going to engage on what we call learning and teaching revolution. I know people are saying what revolution, but you must wait and listen to these inputs that you're going to get from these colleagues here around what this revolution is all about. We have different perspectives that are going to actually be presented here from Stellenbosch University, literature around teaching and learning, and also an international perspective. The colleagues that I have here are Professor Thomas Sattel, who's Director of Business Electronics at the Berlin University of Art, who's sitting here.
Hello.
Say hello to Prof. Yes. Is there anything that you want to add in terms of what you do?
Oh, yeah, maybe I'm a researcher in the internet economy, and so one of my research topic is digital learning. And so we did a lot of research during the last years together with other colleagues from international universities too. And so I brought some results with me. I could show later if you want.
Thank you very much, Professor, and thank you for agreeing to be part of this session. Next to him is Professor Johan, who is the Director of School of Public Leadership. Some of you probably know him. Those who don't know him, you would meet him today. Prof, is there anything that you want to say?
Yeah, no, apart from I hope that we've met everybody, because if we haven't, then you have not been at the contact sessions.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor, and for always willing to be available to engage in some of these things. We then have Dr. J.P. Morgan, who is the director or the head of the center that we are in here today, which is a center that deals with electronic studies. Prof, Doc, is there anything that you want to add?
No, it's nice being here. Indeed, from the Center for Learning Technologies, in that sense, I think the perspective that we bring is a little bit more from a university as a whole, and we're a support service to our faculties. So I think maybe my perspective and what I'm going to say and think about teaching and learning, also the little bit of research that we've done on the theme might be useful and enlightening. But it's nice to be here. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Chief, for agreeing. Thank you, colleagues, for agreeing to be here. We've got background stuff that also makes this possible on a daily basis that I would like to introduce in case we forget them by the time we finish or the debate are so heated that we can't remember them or remember that there are people in the background. I would like to call Danny and Henny just to say hi. In the background, these are the colleagues that makes this possible. Danny and Henny, these are the guys. Every time when you watch the telematics sessions, these are the guys in the background that actually makes it possible. Thank you very much for always being available. These are also experts in all the modules that we teach. By now, they know everything that we deal with in terms of the module. So they are experts in terms of what we do. I'm going to start with a few slides that are just going to give a background around what we are doing, what we are engaging in, and why we are engaging in this discussion. From there, I'm going to give each of the colleagues an opportunity to then present on this topic. If you look at these are the credentials. If you can't remember what I've said, these are the credentials of the colleagues that are here, the panel that we have today that will be dealing. And welcome to all of you, the honor students that are there, here in Stellenbosch, in Bellville, and everywhere in the country. Thank you very much for staying with us and listening to this important discussion that we are going to have today. The agenda of today is simple. We have 4 questions that we are going to engage in. The first question deals with how far have we already progressed in terms of from traditional learning and teaching to what we envisage as the future teaching and learning, which we'll talk about later on. The second question deals with what are the results so far? What have we achieved so far? What are the limitations and constraints so far that we've encountered? And we'll also talk lastly about where are we going further? What more or better we can do in terms of the engagement. So those are the issues that we are going to try and engage with. Without wasting any further time, let me just briefly give a background of the School of Public Leadership and where we are from, for the benefit of the panel as well, especially the two colleagues that are not from SPL, so that they can understand where we are from and where we are going in terms of the engagement. We're coming from a traditional teaching and learning approach where you traditionally have students coming to the university, engaging with the students in the university traditionally, where there would normally be a classroom where students are expected to converge in a class, and there's somebody standing in front of them and teaching and engaging around what is expected of students. That's where we are coming from traditionally. That's the traditional mode of teaching that we are coming from. That was semesterized in terms of having 2 semesters. So you have an admission process. Students are taught through somebody standing in front or facilitating a program, and there is an engagement with different students. You have 2 semesters that is made of 2 semesters that there would then be an engagement in terms of those 2 semesters to where we are today, which is a different platform altogether. We have got what we introduce as contact sessions where students are admitted in terms of the traditions of the university of admitting students, but from there they would have what we call a contact session where they would have contact with the facilitators, with the lecturers in this case, and there would be an engagement in terms of the contact session, and there would be also examinations that are put in terms of what is expected, different assessments that they would have students with assessors. And then we've moved from there. We then, out of engagement with students and feedback from students, we have then from there you would have what we call a blended learning mode where students would then engage with facilitators through telematic session, through videos that would have, and other electronic materials that would have in terms of the engagement. Since last year, we've also introduced another contact session in the middle of the year that deals with the second semester module, or those modules that are perceived to be difficult, where this has also allowed us a platform where we can actually deal with fewer number of students and engage them with one-on-one, and also be able to increase in terms of the material that we have and the interactions that we have with different students, but ultimately would lead to assessments that would decentralize firstly, and when their second opportunities would then be centralized in 2 venues in terms of the engagement. That's where we are in terms of the School of Public Leadership, in terms of what we have as a blended mode. But before maybe we engage intensively in terms of this discussion, I would also like to allow Prof. Becker to also give a perspective as a director of the school in terms of the engagement as well.
Okay, can we have the next slide, and then I can explain it there. Traditionally, I think all of us started our academic careers where there's a demand for higher education, for post-school education, and typically people would then come to the classroom. They know that there's a certain product, and they come and they attend classes and they get the product. So that's the traditional, and typically the product is a full qualification. In other words, you come to a university for the purpose of sitting in a classroom until you have achieved your qualification. And now if you can just go to the next click. So the migration is not only, if we talk about blend, I would prefer to say the migration is not only in how we teach, how we give what we have, but also what we give. So I would like to argue that there's a stronger focus on also what is needed out there, and therefore it's not necessarily starting with a full qualification. It could also be smaller parts, whether we call them shorter learning programs or whatever the terminology is, continued professional development and so on. But clearly there's a market out there which don't necessarily immediately want full qualifications, but they want to be better equipped for what they do. That's the one side, that we have to recognize that we have a role to play in that market as well. And then also that we don't necessarily bring people to the classroom, but that we take the classroom to them, wherever it is. So obviously, then the nature of the classroom is different. It's no longer this virtual space where the where the facilitator stands 2 to 3 meters away, and there's a group of students sitting in front of him or her, but rather the classroom could be anything else, and it could be anywhere in the world. Maybe the next generation is to also take it out of the world. So that's important. And if we can just have one more click there. For me, that is the kind of flexibility that we should accommodate, and that we have been doing deliberately, also based on policy directives from higher education. There is a white paper out, and there's a draft plan at this stage, also considering that. And then if we can look at the next one, this is a slightly more complicated thing, but one of the important things that the draft plan on higher education is also proposing is that we should consider articulation. We should consider how things fit together. So in SPL, we've been working hard to have a whole range of products from immediate post-matric, post-school diploma, which is not traditionally something that Stellenbosch University presented. So we introduced that. It is also the first 2-year diploma in the country, according to the qualification framework that allows for that. But for that 2-year diploma to be approved, it also requires some form of work-integrated learning. So we have that element as well. And then we have an advanced diploma that takes it further. Both of these are called the Diploma in Public Accountability. And then that means that it's not only people that did undergraduate modules majoring in public administration or something similar that would go into our honors here, but people that come from this route as well. And typically it's your learn and earn market. It's people that have been working, and together with work progression, you find qualification progression as well. So there's almost a match between career progression and qualification progression. So it's a different approach. You don't come and study first and then start a career. You do your career, and your progression is both ways. And that also, if you look on the right-hand side of that slide, you'll see that we also have, at this stage, quite familiar in the South African market, a range of shorter products that feed into the formal qualification. Sometimes people start with the shorter products. The example that I have on the screen is the Municipal Minimum Competence Program, which is a compulsory program. Then there's a Middle Management Development Program, and then there would also be management development programs. All of them, in some other way, could be the starting point before going to the formal qualification, or the formal qualification can also provide some kind of compliance for these things, because all of those are also driven by different stakeholders in our market that require these things to be done. For instance, the MMC program is a compulsory program for all municipal officials working with money, and that comes from National Treasury. So what we're saying is that formal on the one side, shorter on the other side, and the two actually works together, depending on what you want. So there's a lot of customization going on. And I think this is our approach, and we're trying to complete it. You'll see there's still an empty space on the right-hand side on the top. There's no reason why you couldn't have advanced management development programs based on master's level study. The only thing is the articulation is not so obvious. But you could certainly have senior career managers that require advanced focus on things, and that space is available. That's it from the SPL side.
All right, thank you very much, Professor. Your input was very insightful, and probably later on, with the students' help, we'll engage with some of the issues that you have raised in terms of the input. But let me give JP an opportunity from the institutional perspective as to, in terms of answering the first question, how far have we already progressed in terms of moving from traditional to teaching and learning mode to where we are now?
Okay, thank you very much. I wish we could also respond, maybe come back to what you just said, Johan, because it's very nice to see in practice what one often reads about in literature, etc. From the university side, I must say, because I don't teach specifically on a specific program. In fact, I I do teach on a postgraduate program in higher education, teaching and learning. So I do have some insights, and maybe what I say is also, also comes from that space. And I'm also struggling with this whole idea of why would one study? I think that's also a theme that we could unpack later on. I've always thought, and this is maybe how one is possibly indoctrinated by a certain institution, or by the place you are. People want a degree. They want to come to Stellenbosch because it's a name and it's a degree, it's an experience, etc. Whereas what one reads, the third educational revolution, and these bigger things coming from the States, I might add, and the things that was now mentioned, is definitely also reality. And reading about millennials and what they want, or the new kind of worker and the worker of the future, etc., work integrated learning. These are very, very interesting questions to my mind. But having said that, at the moment, our focus is, I guess, more on the more bigger programs, the more bigger academic offering, thinking about the undergraduate offering or the postgraduate offering of the university. Of course, we are sitting inside the studio, which is inside the Center for Learning Technologies, and which houses the telematic divisions, the telematic services. So, in fact, we are also, and I am also involved with this mode of teaching that has been going for almost close to 20 years. So there were also some developments there that I can maybe share later on. But I was hoping to to maybe first problematize the question a little bit, and I hope my colleagues will not mind that. And maybe the issue of the revolution brings out a bit of I guess the Marxist in me, maybe, or the or the questioning, the ideological, critical questioning. But when we say how far are we progressed from traditional learning and teaching, or teaching and learning, the idea of progression, that's something I would like to ask. What does it mean to actually progress? Of what is it almost a new liberal kind of agenda, or is it a different kind of progression that we're talking about? And if we say we want to progress from the traditional, we're already making a value statement in the sense that the traditional is the old, that's the it's the bad, or it's we must escape from that. We must get as far away from that as possible, which I don't think we are saying, but I think one must be careful. And the reason I say this is because there recently was a seminar held at our university on one of our previous vice rectors of DVCs, that she talked about academic leadership and what is the role of, lecturers, but also heads of departments, other kinds of academic leaders in the space that is higher education. And the message that she clearly said was that the whole higher education space is in a fairly difficult bind through many different influences, globalization influences. It could be called kind of new liberalization of higher education, where it's about the business and the clients and the processes, and the academics become cogs in the machine, in the teaching machine, as it were. And you get these words like economies of scale, return of on interest, on investment, and all of those kind of things. And obviously, we always need a balanced view on that. But I think that's what lies underneath my questioning. And maybe also later on, as we talk, what I would say are some of the things that we are doing now and that we are moving towards. So those are some of my first questions. For example, is progression about metrics? Are we saying we can reach more students and different students? Is our metric if being more effective? Doing more with less, which is often also part of that. Or is it with doing more with less staff? Or on the other hand, are we saying the new would also always be new technologies? So is the focus on the educational technologies, or is it on that we now have different modes of delivery, or that we have a different teaching and learning approach? So are we progressing in the sense of having a different thinking about what education is, how it works, how we do it, all of those things? So those are a few questions. I do have other points as well that I'll raise later on, but maybe for a first response to that question is maybe a bit of a problematization is around progress and the tradition.
It is indeed thought-provoking what you have just discussed, but of course would have to give an opportunity to Professor Thomas to also make an input. There are a number of comments that have come from students as well in terms of this engagement. One, Professor Becker complimenting the fact that the university does take feedback very seriously, especially the school, with dividing the contact session into two, contact session, one in February and the other one in June. There's also a comment from a student around the structure of systematic learning, how it structures its it talks to the revolution that you talked about, that you breaking boundaries of electronic learning and all of that. So that's also a positive comments that is actually coming out from the students in terms of the engagement. So I encourage the students to keep on engaging with us, asking questions or making comments. This is available. Professor, let me give you an opportunity to also engage in this issue before we go any further.
I'm just wondering, would like to ask some of your questions from my point of view first, and then I could step into some materials I just brought with me.
Yes.
Yeah, so would we do it in this way? Yeah.
Yes.
So the first thing is, coming to your last question, technology from my point of view is only the tool. So we shouldn't focus too much on technology. We should, or we do it, using it like an enabler, for example. And that comes to the first question. Enabler in the area of giving more people the opportunity to participate on our learning and teaching experience and our very good content we do have at the universities. And so the technology enables us and a lot of more people that they don't have to come to our houses, to our campus physically. They could participate. So our challenge from my point of view is, of course, according to business plans we have and all the limits we have on our staff which has to do it. Our challenge is how could we produce and deliver all the content we have to a broader or more and more citizens out there. And so we did some research during the last years on the concept of MOOCs, Massive Open Online Courses. And so we are just we discussed that before, we are just in a phase where we got disillusion course. You can't make money out of it from the perspective of the university. But on the other hand, many, many people could participate. And so this is the middle of your questions. What could be our role and what should be our position to develop bringing content and knowledge to more and more people? And so that's, from my point of view, a first quick answer to your questions.
Okay, can I also? I think it's vital, and this will come back all the time while we're talking. You've been focusing on the word revolution, but I actually have deliberately changed around. Normally, we refer to teaching and learning, to learning and teaching, because I think this is probably what the big demand is at this stage. Is that there's a different learning need. And therefore, the teaching responds to that. And for me, that is the revolution. As I've also explained, that we have been stuck since the days of Socrates with certain, philosophies and this kind of a master teaches the student situation, and that is changed. The learning need has changed, and therefore the teaching must respond to that. So it's because of the learning that the teaching changes, but it's not always departing from. The fact that we brought in a second contact week in June is actually reverting a little bit back to more contact, because we felt for the blend, that is going to be a better, and actually it was a recommendation from students, and it works well. So you have to purpose design. I think the teaching is the customization towards addressing the learning need.
I think there are 2 points that are coming out very prominently. The issue of access, that you have got a wider access in terms of this. And the second point that is coming out very clearly is that you have to balance between this access and the functional or the effectiveness of the university or the institution that runs this program. And we will discuss these issues further. I don't know whether there's another issue. One of the students, just to concur with all of you, says in the WhatsApp that I'm sitting in my lounge now in Langeban, and I'm watching the session from my lounge. You know, that's access at the convenience of a student.
That's a good example.
And Langeban is a good place to be.
I can imagine.
I concur.
Yes. But I think that's good illustration of the importance of access and convenience for students as well. Otherwise, you'd have to drive to Cape Town or wherever to actually access this program. Do you want to go further now to your points after?
Yeah, I could bring in some of my things I brought with me. So if we could change to that presentation, please.
Okay, while we are doing that, maybe let's look at the results so far. While we are still busy with technology, the results so far in terms of the experience with us, and you would assist me, the colleagues, especially from the University of Stellenbosch, is that we have seen greater access for students. And you have more students that can actually access our programs through that. And secondly, there is also, with the support that we give, with the extra support that we give, there is also a higher number of throughput rate. So the throughput rate also does increase because of the number of interventions that you put in place. So it's not only creating access to programs that are of demand or programs that are needed by the industry, because we must also remember that the programs that we do, I think the point that we are raising about mock programs is that they are needed by the industry, but do they make universities functional or viable or not? And that's the issue that we're grappling with. With this current program that we have, it does respond to the needs of the industry, and it's also viable, which becomes the middle ground in terms of the engagement that we have. Maybe let me give you an opportunity to do the presentation.
To step into one revolutionary thing. So after getting the topic, I'm a fan of science fiction genre, and especially of the Matrix movie. Some of you might know it, and I put out a special theme to just have a look at what I think could be revolutionary. So it's where she comes to that helicopter, and she don't know how to
Tank, I need a
fly
pilot
it.
program for a B-212 helicopter. Hurry. Let's go.
So, and immediately she gets the knowledge from the system. So if we talk about revolution, that would be really revolutionary. And as you mentioned, maybe we sit here in 10 years or 5 years, you said 5 or 10 years. Yeah, we have to look at where we are then. Of course, we are still in a very traditional way to do our teaching. And in my research, we focused on the topic of future learning in 3 areas. The first area is that area of learning research about, for example, gamification. We talk about flipped classroom concepts, so that might be come back to the Socrates idea that you learn the content and the basic theories in your own speed. You can repeat and repeat until you have the feeling that you now know how methods or theories are working, and then you come back to the class and to the master, to the teacher, and there comes the work integrated thing in place. Of course, now you can talk about different cases where you adapt and transfer the knowledge you have got. And so so that's what we think about flipped classroom concepts. So the question is, how far are we right now proceeded? And what we learned too is that coming from blended learning concepts from the 90s or 2000s, we thought, okay, 25% of our teaching now is as an e-learning, so a quarter of that, that's blended learning. That was the first step I learned, or we discussed in Germany when we talked about blended learning. And now we, after the MOOC developments, we learned that the learners don't like to have always 45-minute sessions online. That's sometimes boring, or they don't want to participate in that long period. And so they would like to have more learning nuggets, we call that. So short videos or short sessions, only 5 or 6 minutes. So that's what we get out of the learning research. And the last point, the individual learning path, is the adaptive learning concept, where any learner can do the learning in his or her speed and repeat as often as you want. And so that's the one area. The second area is the work environment. So when do I would like to learn? So you call that work integrated learning, and we did a lot of research according to that. Of course, as you asked the question, how should be the concept of learning in the future? Where should I learn? When should I learn? And so, of course, I come to the university to get a degree. But when I'm in the industry and have a position, learning never stops. So we call that the lifelong learning concept. You might have the same expression here. And so we doing a lot of research, and after I have my degree and after I'm in a position, whatever I do, how could learning help me to adapt to individual situations, to new technologies, adapt to a situation? So, and we could decide later. I have examples out of our research to that area, so you could decide where I could or I should get deeper. And last point, as you mentioned, and I said we see it as an enabler, is the technology and the behavior. So the self-determinate anywhere in a lounge, in somewhere else, you should be able to learn. And of course, online, we are just online. But the question from our point of view was, how mobile should learning be in the future? Of course, we are all on our ways with our smartphones. We are used to have the WhatsApps and short information about whatever. So I'm just traveling around the last 2 weeks in South Africa. I loved it. Beautiful country, I could say. And of course, often I've been a TripAdvisor and all these supporting gadgets or solutions. And so our question in research and doing projects is, how mobile should teaching and learning in the future, even from our academic side? So that's the first broad overview, and I would stop here and would leave it to you or to the students where I should go deeper.
Okay, JP?
It's wonderful, and I love what it sparks, what you have said now, especially the mobile, because my first reaction was around your research, and also that you mentioned, for example, that the concept of blended learning is fairly old-fashioned in a sense. Whereas here in Stellenbosch University, and in fact South Africa, it's fairly new.
Okay.
So because, and this is what we've learned from research in conceptions of emerging technologies, is that it's not always clear is for whom is it emergent. So the context is very, very important. So I think that's an important point. So what I want to say is that sometimes we feel in South Africa, in Africa, we're always behind. We're behind Europe, and we definitely behind the States, if we believe them. So this narrative, as it were, of Africa and where we are, and that we're behind, the globe and the rankings, because and with technologies everything comes late. So in a sense, one could take that stance, and then, as I've said, one could say, oh, blended learning is an old thing. On the other hand, the importance of taking context seriously means that you don't just import anything like willy-nilly, the newest thing. And that's maybe one of the things. And I mean, I lead, in a sense, the adoption of technology at Stellenbosch University. Our center says we strive to inspire, the meaningful use of technology. So we try to do that. But I've become quite sensitive and wary of just taking really the newest things that you see on the phone, the app, the internet, etc., and then just automatically, as it were, accept that this is going to be good, it's going to work, it's going to improve learning. And I fully agree with you around the approach. This concept of affordance, to me, is very, very important if we look at tools and technologies. If the tool affords a very specific kind of learning to happen, for example, or an outcome to be achieved, then by all means. The problem is that sometimes, people just choose the newest fad or tool and apply it to a learning situation where it's not applicable at all, and it fails and that. So there's that very important point. And then my last point, what I want to make, is this idea of the mobile. And according to my reading, is that in a sense, Africa skipped most of the fiber and not the fiber, the cabling and the other stuff. We went like directly to mobile, which again is an opportunity that we might add. And I mean, this is one of the last things that I'd said. I think we must definitely, for us, focusing on the mobile is critical. On the same hand, one must be careful that all this nano learning or this micro learning or this learning nuggets maybe don't take away or become takeaway learning in the sense of McDonaldizing learning. Because as far as I understanding, a deep, long reading, investing yourself in thought, and especially in higher education, if this kind of the style of learning is going to take away or erode, maybe a very deep engagement with the topic at hand, we are maybe taking away from the power of actually this knowledge and the content that you were talking about. So,
thank you very much for that response. It was really thought-provoking from both sides. I don't know whether with your research, have you also looked at where you talk about making sure that you have these small nuggets or these little bite? Is it because the material that is presented is boring for students that they don't want to actually, or is it presented in such a way that it becomes interesting for them so that we don't lose your last point where we actually lose this proper learning, where there's continuity in terms of learning and all of that?
Yeah. So I would step into one example, if you don't mind.
Yes.
And it's one example where we did a project. We called it Competence and Situation Individual Learning System. And it was funded by the state of Germany, the research state, and it is to the topic of Industry 4.0, so the new IoT industrial revolution, and the idea was to have that as a kind of a business integrated learning system for further education, and just to step into it. No, this is gone.
There it is.
Oh, there it is. Yeah, thank you. So it affects the learning nuggets, the individual learning path, and the adapted individual learner type and speed. And our idea was not to have that McDonaldization aspect, but to integrate the adaptive learning path in the way that we said there might be any learner coming in with a different skill. And according to his or her skill, we provide learning nuggets. But there is a kind of a curricular behind that. And as you might see later, You have that. I skipped that. We did that, for example, for 3 different persona groups. So the expression of persona is known. Yeah, okay.
That's
so
a learning design.
so learning design concept. Of course, we're coming from the user-centered design approach. So our main target is that we only build learning solutions which helps the learner and to help them to be faster at their point where they would like to go to, maybe an exam or maybe to learn about new technology or whatever. So, and just to step in, I start with the persona of someone who's in the management, and the management perspective might be here as an example to the topic of incident management. And as you see on the left side of that chart, you have a color-based module system. So any color nugget, any nugget has a color, and that belongs to a special topic. So immediately you are very fast able to see, okay, there's, for example, incident management is red. Of course, it's a very important topic. And so you step into that, and I just show you a short video to how it works. Oh, yeah, that's a pity. Of course, now we copied it so often that we lose that video. Okay. How we do it, I talked to the technique, how we could do that. Maybe switch to the folder. Could you come to the computer?
Okay, we can just continue with the discussion while they are helping us with the technical aspect.
Maybe on this point, if I may, because I think what excites me is the fact of the personas, as well as the strength of that in learning design.
It's a video 1, or have you one? I can't see it from here. Just started, yeah.
As you all know, a growing number of institutions around the world have started offering massive open online.
You can continue, JP, with your discussion. Sometimes technology does this, it cuts and stop, but I think we can continue with the engagement.
No, I can't see it from here. Up there are 3? Yes. Yeah, okay. Just take one of that. Yep. Yeah, that's one of their examples. Okay. So as you see now, an incident occurs, and so the people who are at the machine, for example, get the information about that incident, and then you get the next learning session about how to solve that problem, what happens at the machine. Of course, in Industry 4.0, you have the challenge that a lot of people are having new technology to handle. And after that, you can have their information or give the information to the system how you solve the problem. So it is also a kind of a peer-to-peer learning approach that you could put into that system a new nugget where you give all the others who might face that problem the information about how to solve that problem. So, and you could imagine that to a lot of topics, for example, privacy issues, data security issues, or whatever, you could put in these kind of learning nuggets. And that hasn't to be always videos.
Right.
It could be a literature review. It could be a deep learning module with a lot of, as you said, deep thinking modules. So we would have the opportunity to share that and to combine and mix these kind of nuggets.
No, I personally, I love that idea, and I think what is good to hear is also that that you have the right kind of design for the right kind of knowledge. I think that's very important, and also obviously for your audience and the level, etc., which would then decide what you choose to do. But the concept of peers helping each other through collaboration, discussion, all of those, I think those are some of the progresses we've made. To come back to our first question, for example, our focus on blended learning made people just come to think about their own practice. That's the first thing. Before we get to how we design new ideas, people first need to take the first step. And maybe that's something that Johan will now say is why people change. But from our perspective, if one can open at least the teacher's mind first, because they at Stellenbosch and in most universities, I think, in control of the learning. So I love this idea of that learning should also, coax or produce the teaching and not the other way around. But traditionally, it's still, the lecturer decides, so I'm going to teach this. So for a first step, if one can activate people's imagination around what learning is, how it works, and what other things you can do, that's where our strong focus on the theory of teaching and learning comes in. So once you can tell people it's not just about talking and writing exams, but maybe peer-to-peer learning, just that concept, or different kinds of assessment, or different kinds of collaborative learning, or flip. I mean, there's endless possibilities. But I think the first step and the bit of progress that we've made is that more people are now at least thinking about these things. The kind of discussion we're having is one that I think 10, 20 years ago, I might be wrong, would be very difficult to have. But it's almost like people are switched on a little bit more on just thinking about teaching and learning. And that opens up so many other channels and avenues, etc.
I see we are also now discussing limitations and constraints as well in terms of our discussion, which is fine. No, it's fine. There's nothing wrong with it. But I think what I was just saying is that the conversation is flowing in such a way that we move. I don't have to say we must move to this point.
Just thinking about the revolutionary aspect, I would like to add that this is a real smart chance to include the knowledge of the students and the learners. Of course, I'm looking to the students, and you all know, as we know as teachers, that in any class there are some students who are smart in some areas, very special smart. So someone is better in finance, someone is better in design, and so on. So and what we give them the opportunity as a learning group is that the smarter ones could include solutions they produce for the others. So it's very easy to include one of these learning nuggets to say, okay, this was the theory from Johan, and I wasn't able to solve that question or practice, and but someone in the class was able, and so you definitely would have WhatsApp groups and whatever where you ask the questions. Did someone solve that questionnaire or whatever? But you could always think about bringing in this as a teaching module approach for us. And so it's more a way of maybe have a little revolution in thinking who has which role.
Okay.
I won't respond, but maybe
Okay, no respond. You go.
No, I'm immediately thinking about one of the big discussions in higher education, definitely in South Africa, but also in some of the more of the global South, and that is the question of decolonization. What does decolonizing, the curriculum mean? And I mean, even this approach that you are saying could actually help with that, because it's not just about, in a sense, what people know, what they are better at, but it could also be where they are. So this challenge looks maybe different in my context, and there every learner can participate in the process of learning and building knowledge by contributing to each other. How this problem is addressed in my context, or in a different, culture or language space, or whatever the differences might be, and immediately you move away from a kind of a colonized approach to a more decolonized approach. And so I actually can. I see it.
So we can use our diversity to our advantage, in a sense, in terms of the engagement. Use our diversity to our advantage.
And that is progress.
Yeah, I think if I can just add to the discussion, one of the constraints that we have is that we are actually collecting this wealth of data from students through the assignments, for example. Because they're all work-related, they're all very much applied, and they work with the real world out there. And they come and they merge the little bit of theory that we can offer with practice out there. I think the challenge is to make it more available. Because it's hidden in Sunlearn as documents. So this is something that we should really look at, is how can we celebrate all this wealth of wisdom that's continuously bombarding us. I mean, we are privileged that we are confronted with so much. Okay, here and there it becomes difficult to read an assignment, but in general, we're privileged.
So let me bring it in the phrase I have in mind. So there are a lot of tiny diamonds of knowledge in the cohort of you, the students. And if we find a way to include that, for example, as kind of case studies in our teaching environment, that would be perfect for all of us, because we learn with them about their topics and their practical cases. If we could include that, we learn better how to transfer the theories. And then we're coming back to the flipped classroom concept. We could choose some of these examples to discuss this with the whole class. And anyone would benefit out of it.
Well, that's a very interesting concept.
And just to take it a step further, because we are now asking the question of the open. And this is something that I would have liked to address later on as well. But it's something that's very close to my heart, but it's something quite difficult to see happening. So I want to connect what we were saying now to the first MOOC that Stellenbosch University made, because it actually shows how teaching in the open, because it was an open MOOC, it was around teaching for change, African philosophy of education, and it was grounded in a kind of a Ubuntu approach that Professor Yusuf Wagit led. So it's from education, it's a philosophical kind of thing. And I mean, he put his theory on the table, like Johan now said, but then opened up the discussion in such a way that it elicited, elicits responses from all the students all around the world. And this was for him also an eye opener. And he's very seasoned, but he was like a little child, with a new toy. He couldn't believe the insights that he was gaining, from all parts of the world, Afghanistan, Israel, the States, South Africa, etc. And also because it's a MOOC that came from Africa, as it were, there were indeed more African or global South participants. It's very interesting how it works. Just the fact that the theme had Africa in it and was from a South African professor made that more people from the global South actually participated. And so it's something very hard to argue with, that is very good for knowledge and good for learning and good for everyone. Now the question, if it's so good, why do we hide it then again? And there we're back to the question of what is higher education and for whom is higher education? Where does something like the public good come in, etc.? And what are strategies to combine things like doing things in the open that everyone can learn from, even in a course? That's maybe a quick win. It's easier to do it in a course because you can just unhide it, for example. But what is that difference between having students that pay for a product and they're now in this space, but others outside of that space. You know, that to me it's very, very interesting, and that I think is some of the important future things that we look at.
Maybe I must throw in one of the questions that is asked here. I thought I would leave it for later, but maybe it does to stimulate the discussion. One student is saying the biggest challenge that we currently have is the issue of accessibility because of limited data that students have in terms of accessing these. The student actually says this is a good idea, but we need to talk broadly now. The conversation needs to be extended to make sure that there's accessibility of internet and all of that. And I think that's a valid point that the student is making. And I'm bringing it to talk to those limitations that you're engaging and to include to them in terms of the engagement as well. And maybe that's not a problem that you have in Germany, for example, you know. Yeah.
Some say so, some say so. So you never have enough bandwidth. Yeah. Never, ever. So you could have, even would like to have more. Yeah. Yeah. But I see that point, and now technology, coming back to that point, comes in place, that we have to look at technology tools, for example, which pack data packages, to pack that and so on. Data, so and we have learned in the past when we had not such powerful computers, because I didn't say that, but I'm a computer scientist from my background, and I remember that we had mainframe computers which haven't the power I today have on my iPhone. So we learned how to use these kind of technology and to program it in a way that we have the limits and can play with that limits. Okay. And coming back to that point, we should focus on that. We should focus on how can we deliver and give the people out there with limited accessibility the chance to participate. That would be a real interesting research project, which helps all of us.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
But from our experience, and I don't want to contradict what JP earlier said, that you shouldn't necessarily always be on the cutting edge ahead, because then you can also have big problems. But I think the one thing that I've learned from the different programs where we just decided we're going to go the route of e-learning, we're going to be more computer-based or now mobile-based and so on, is that there's an initial lack and then very rapidly that's filled. I think what I've learned, especially from the municipal minimum competence program, is that we just went to an online administration and teaching system, and there were lots of people in the municipalities that said, well, they've never touched a computer, but actually that forced them to do that. And within months, there's just nobody that don't know how to use it. So it's also that benefit, in a sense, it actually creates the motivation. And it also creates new markets, because now, all over the country, in all the municipalities, they're busy putting in optical fiber to every household. And it's just like this. At the next moment, you've got bandwidth. So it's rapidly changing as a result of creating the demand.
Okay. Yeah, I agree with the question about the constraints, but I also agree with Johan that it's a very interesting space, and I've been in this for long. And sometimes I feel maybe I've lost a bit of my bravery, become a bit boring. So on the one hand, the conservative approach is, and our IT, for example, department is very strong on this. So maybe I'm a bit influenced by them as well. They've come to the conclusion that we shouldn't really give students tools that we cannot support. Okay, and that that sounds right. Okay, because it doesn't help we have the telematics, but we can't make sure that people will lock, that will be at the learning centers, that the satellite will be up and running, that SunLearn, will be working, that the videos will be recorded, all of those things. So there are certain basics that need to be in place. So that's a philosophy of of a conservative philosophy, where you just make sure that there's enough support in place, and then you can use the technology. Whereas a lot of the exciting things often happen where you just take a leap, take a plunge, and the rest must follow. And institutions are typically quite slow in change. But I mean, that doesn't. I mean, we must think creatively. I think that's the solution. So think, yes, all of that, but what is a creative solution? Like, just in a small example, by using SunLearn, which is a Moodle learning management system, and just by integrating the mobile app, which is freely available on Android and iOS, etc., it has, for example, an offline syncing functionality. So there, all of a sudden, if you know about it, and you know, if I'm in good internet space at work or on campus or whatever, I can sync. I can actually get all my stuff on the mobile. When I go home, I can watch all the videos. I can, or I guess you guys also send maybe DVDs or flash disks. We work with the audience, and that is, to me, is very, very critically important. Any learning design starts with a persona. It starts with analyzing who is the market, and who are our students, what can they do, and then take it from there. So,
I think, Thomas, in taking your point, we should not forget, I think what Johan said was also very important. There is spillover effect, the unintended consequences of the program that are positive, where you now have more students getting involved in computers, using computers and all of that. That is an intended consequence. That is positive.
Yes. Yeah. I just wanted to come to one other example which touches the mobile question. Of course, that's, from my point of view, a good example that we are just being a little bit ahead of what's common in teaching and learning, but not too far. And we use the concept of design thinking. I don't know if your students learned about that method. So you all know that. MVPs, minimal viable products, produce, prototype, and then try early, fail often, and iterate and iterate. And so we started with that idea of having the lectures and the nuggets I just showed to you on a mobile. And we learned that it doesn't bring a real advantage for the students. And but we didn't stop and tried out different formats. And currently, we learned that I have to, you see my glasses for that. Okay. So now I see the cursor. Yeah, there it is. And so what we did is we tried out the format of quizzes. We thought, okay, that might be a format where students would have fun to learn, maybe be in a kind of a competition, and we built that for now coming back to work integrated learning for one of the biggest insurance companies in Germany, and just to try out with their professionals, could that help them? Would that give a learning advantage? And so we tried out a little bit about virtual reality in learning. And so I don't know how far you are with that concept. Tried out that. Not okay. So currently what you see here is on the left side is in the medical department. Of course, you have easily on iPhones and Androids, you can have that augmented and virtual reality apps with that small carton around it, small box around it. So, and in that department, we learned that a lot of students could participate in a virtual reality operation in a 360-degree, participate what they never had ever the chance to see before. And even in some of our research partners, we are in the area of medical information. So all the things you have to know about new medicals, all the facts and so on. So that could help you to get very easily and short the information about that to learn it. Coming to the quizzes, what you see here is that we build information about theories and new product information in a shared learning context as a quiz learning system. And the good thing which came out was that the participants, the students, liked this most. Of course, they used it not as we thought for getting new knowledge. They used it for preparation of their exams. And that was coming out of that research where we just tried and giving the students different approaches and modules, and we never expected that this comes out. And what also helped in the peer-to-peer learning concept is, I don't know if I have that with me. Oh yeah, here you have. I can give you that charts later. See how the usage rates got up in that. When do they use the play? That was interesting for us at what time of the day. So mostly, as you said, is they downloaded the quiz, and then when they're commuting at home after work, then are sitting in the bus and doing the quizzes. So it's an additional way of learning. And just coming back to that slide is you see on the third screen, there's a ranking, a social ranking of that quiz. So it gives you a ranking who is the fastest and the one with less mistakes and so on. And what you can find here is, of course, the A persons we all know, so the one who would always be very competitive and the first position. But what's more interesting for us was that you could see that some of their students, participants, wasn't able to achieve, and they couldn't answer all the questions in the right way. And then something happened in the social aspect. The other students helped them. They helped them and asked them, "What's your problem? Why don't you come around?" and so on. And then suddenly we as teachers saw that this is a good way to support the ones we are otherwise losing in our teaching approach. So there haven't been some spillover effects, as you mentioned that. We never thought about that when we designed that as a quiz, because we said, okay, it's a gamification approach. But suddenly it came out that it helped the students, it helped us as teachers, and it was a good, or is a good thing, especially for preparation of the exams.
Brilliant.
All right, where to from here?
Well, I can just say gamification is on there, and Thomas has mentioned it, but I guess not. Maybe that's not the only example, but I think there is maybe something in there. I know in industry training, there are books written about that, gamification of learning for learning, I guess. But we have tried it out at the university as well, here and there. I have a PhD student. That's his idea, is to build a game which will see if students are ready for university, for example. It's a diagnostic kind of assessment. And there are also other colleagues at also in EMS faculty that have started that, also creating their Sun Learn as a big, as it were, game, and you bring in gaming elements, etc. So I think there's and there's other colleagues who've used something like Classcraft, which is a free free gaming system that is made sort of for education, that's educationalized, teaching maths and teaching microbiology. It was quite fascinating what people come up with. In those cases, not necessarily the game doesn't teach them maths, or the game doesn't teach them microbiology, but it works on the on upping the engagement level, the motivation. They actually play it in class, for example. So that's another thing that we haven't talked about is, we have the technology over the distance, but what can technology offer even to the in-class, participation that people have? And so, students are having lots of fun. So there's lots of little, examples and ideas coming up all over the place that could be useful.
So there's still space, there's still a future for clickers and all of that. You're saying they still, if they're used innovatively in a manner that would address some of the issues.
Yes.
Yes. Any other way forward?
Maybe you have just feedback from the student that they might have questions.
Actually, I don't have question except for this is normally a discussion that we'll have with students where some will agree and some will disagree. And the student here says data connection is actually not an issue. Okay. What the student sees as a most important issue that perhaps needs to be addressed or to enhance whatever platforms we have now, it's where we create a platform where students can have interactions amongst themselves much better. So I think you would normally get where students would disagree. And this is the platform that is created for engagement. And the student says, if I would know if I'm preparing for assignment, what am I on the right track by asking my colleagues instead of the facilitators who are very nice. I think he's giving us compliments, but he says it would be much better to find out from my colleague as to whether I'm doing the right thing. And maybe that platform where you gave an example where it's a cell phone where a student can see what the others are doing, who is struggling, who is doing actually well, that could actually create a platform where students will start engaging with each other. Once they notice that there is this one who's struggling, and you rightfully said, they would then approach that particular student and say, how can we help you? Is your approach correctly? This may be what you need to do, and so forth and so forth. So that's a platform that they perhaps think is a way forward that we should engage in.
Yeah, good point. Of course, even if we are having more and more distance learning and digital learning aspects, we have to find ways to coming back to the social aspect of the classroom. Of course, in a classroom, you are much easier see if someone doesn't come up with the knowledge he has or she has to know or she has to have. So, but in a distance learning concept, I don't know how it is here, so that could be an additional way which helped us as teachers and, of course, the students.
I think what we haven't mentioned yet is, I mean, the whole world is going bananas for big data. I mean, that is the new thing. Everything is about data science, big data, and then the analysis of that data. And I think that has also spilled over into higher education. And just 2 days ago, we had a demo from a company that provides a kind of a plug-in into the learning management system that provides dashboards and learnings and insights from the data that is gathered through students participating, doing things, discussing things like that. So I think currently the way forward for our institution, and I know there are other South African institutions more further ahead, is taking this idea of learning analytics seriously. And it's in a sense not the social. I agree the social is the best. I mean, that's the best way to create a community of learning, people looking out for each other. But if you start getting maybe to lots of students, 120, 200, 300, 400 students, what do you do? And I'm still not sure how strongly I agree with that, but I think it can only help, especially if students are a bit more at a distance. If you can find a way of knowing where they are, and especially those ones who are struggling, that you can reach out to them, that you can support them in whatever way necessary. The demo that we saw takes discussion forums that the students post and has a kind of a built-in algorithm that tests for a kind of originality of thought. So it can, according to that algorithm, show you these students are writing of 60% of what the student writes is more or less kind of original kind of writing, whereas 30% of it is regurgitating other students' words and ideas, and some others is just, the typical I agree, I don't agree, or plagiarism or stuff like that, which is out of the country. So I found that quite useful actually for the first time, especially if we're talking about lots of students. You can't track everyone so personally, but maybe now we can. But now again, the revolutionary me says, should we be tracking students, etc., etc. So again, things have two sides always, but I think that is not going to go away. And of course, Thomas, what you said is that for that to work, for us to be able to know where students are, and for them to know where each other are, first of all, it needs to be digital. That's the first step. And that's something we haven't discussed yet, is that, what must you do before you can do other things? It doesn't help you have a great learning analytics system, but only half of your courses, are actually using SunLearn or the LMS, and of those people are still only putting up maybe some documents. People are not really using the platforms to the full extent. So there's a lot that needs to happen. And I think in that space, it's probably easier where you have a real need for a distance program or a mode 2 or a fully online, etc. Then different things come into play. It's more difficult for the traditional, and there we're back at that word, for the traditional residential course to innovate in this way, because and it becomes difficult to make some things just make sense to use it. Because to use such a system, everything needs to be digital, and all students must participate there, and the lecturers must also be there, for example. So this whole idea of a long chain or a continuum of things, I think, probably still holds true for higher education, at least Stellenbosch.
If I can just add, I think the one positive, in spite of the limitations and the fact that we can do much more to improve on the social aspect, is that students are doing it themselves anyway. They have. I think this is one of the reasons why the throughput has improved. I mean, when we started with the whole idea of having short contact sessions along remote learning kind of environments, the throughput numbers initially dropped. But we have seen dramatic increases. Obviously, the blend has also been modified to make it more possible. But I think what we have started seeing more and more is that at the contact sessions, students start getting together and they start organizing themselves into working groups, and they start supporting each other. The introduction that we've done of the second week was the result of a group, one of the groups that actually started discussing and feeling what's wrong, what should change. And they were brave enough to come back and say, this should change. So I think this is for me a very positive thing. I think they thought they're going to be a little bit in trouble because of what they did, and that we wouldn't take kindly to their criticism. But it's important that we should be very open. Obviously, what often happens is that one group says this and the other says just the opposite. The first reason why we initially had just one long contact session is because there are students coming from all over the world, and the traveling cost is expensive. So if you travel once only, it's much cheaper. And that's the reason why we didn't just drop the 2 weeks and make it 1 week and then another week, because it's still an option for people to only come once. But now the choice is theirs. And that came as a result of this kind of the social engagement that students had. So they're starting to do it anyway. Whether we have the right support platforms for that or not, they do it.
Just to combine your points, yes, we not have very fast all the students on the platforms, and that's the same at our place. But my experience now is that if we give them more and more different opportunities where we learn which is accepted and which helps the students and us to improve, giving our knowledge to the students and help them to get better and faster maybe to their exam, then it could be a win-win game. And so as we have discussed later, discussed before, is that something comes into a kind of a flow where you give them some solutions, some modalities, give some learning experience on a new way, gamification or whatever, and then you see, okay, suddenly there's a flow, and all students participate. Of course, maybe it's fun, it helps them, and so we have to look for these kinds of sweet spots. Right. That's one of our tasks from my point of view. And I have one example with me. I have a lot of gamification examples, but I have one example with me from a colleague also from Taiwan, and he's very successful with a kind of a game. And I would just step into it to show it to you. Of course, it's from my point of view a very interesting approach, and his students love that, and so we maybe get some out of that. So I step here a lot of these charts and come to this one. So it's a kind of a land building game, like Catan. You know that Catan, Siedler von Catan's game. So you see all these points there, and each of these points are a part of the land. And so as the first student comes to such a, is a kind, how you call that, from the mathematics, how is it called, that 6.6 corner thing, it's a hexagon?
I think it's hexagon.
Hexagon. Okay, so if you would like to have that hexagon, and for example, you are the yellow player, and you have to answer a knowledge question. So that's the first thing. If you answer the knowledge question right, you get that hexagon. The next student who comes to that hexagon and would like to have it has to answer 2 knowledge questions. And then what you could do, and you see in the top all these daemons and all these things, what you could do is you can protect your hexagon. So if you answered the question right and it's your hexagon, you could put daemons on it to protect your hexagon. So if you answer 3 or 4 knowledge questions for that hexagon, you have 3 daemons on that hexagon. So the next student who comes and would like to have your hexagon has to answer 5 questions. So what happens is at the end of their semester, the students got their credits according to how many hexagons they got in the game.
Wow. Gaming points leads to real life success.
Yeah. So and it's Warser, and he explained it in the way that he got a telephone call from a mother of one of these students, and she called him, the lecturer, and said, "What happened with my son? Because he is gaming all the day, and when I ask him, he is telling me that he is studying." So that's a flow system, and just one example out of our research, which I found worth to present, that if we found these kind of systems, that might help and bring us in a flow, and the students too.
Absolutely.
That's a wonderful example. Are there many more to share? Okay. Any other point?
I brought this.
Okay.
I don't know if you know what this is, Thomas.
Maybe
it's a QR code.
QR code,
but it's and as well you mentioned earlier, clickers in the classroom.
Yeah.
Now, to me, this is kind of a symbol of where we are at the moment, because this is called a plicker. Okay. So it's a paper clicker.
Okay.
So just shortly, it's not so important now how it works, but the concept is that it has 4 sides, A, B, C, or D, and in a classroom, one could do a quiz, and put 4 options, A, B, C, or D, and then the students work out the problem, and then they vote by turning the cards in the right way. For example, if I vote A, my A must be on top. Now, where the innovation comes in on the iPhone and Android, on your cell phone, that only the teacher needs. So you need only one phone with the internet connectivity, can then, through the app, Plicker's app, can stand in front and literally scan the whole room and pick up what everyone voted. And then it becomes immediately a graph that shows you 30% voted A, 5B, and then so it works like a clicker audience response kind of system, but with paper. And to me, it's very nice. People love it, but also because it's often right for our context, where not all the students have cell phones in class, or where there's limited Wi-Fi in class, etc. So it's to me a great adaptation where we see like the paper, which is a very old technology, and the absolute new technology of a cell phone, the new cell phone and the internet connected to that is a great combination in the same space. So, yeah, just thought to share that as well.
Okay, interesting. We don't have any comments from the students, so I think this discussion has been very insightful to me as well. I think our students also have learnt a lot from the discussion, from your input. Unless there is any other thing that one has prepared and you don't want us to go without engaging in it, I think we have learnt a lot. Thank you very much for actually doing this presentation. I'm hoping that we are going to make this available to our students as well, so that this discussion can continue. It doesn't stop here, but we can continue with this engagement. And thank you very much also to you, Prof, for your engagement and all of that. JP, for also your insightful thoughts around these issues, and the fact that you have indicated to us, you have given us surety that the university support these processes, and they further try to engage and look at ways of making sure that students are better engaged, and we create a culture. I think that's what you raised earlier on. We create a culture where these modes of learning are something that we use in the future, because we are going in the future that would not have resources to actually refurbish our lecture halls and all of that. And what better way to do that than using the material that we have, because most of the students have cell phones and all of that, and we can actually tap on that and make sure that we are able to get a more of the learning process happening at that level. And I think also lastly was that we should engage our students more, allow them to learn on their own, try and make sure that the learning doesn't only end up in the formal processes, but outside of those processes, there's also continuous learning that happens, and that was very insightful. I think our students have benefited a lot from this engagement, and I'm hoping that we are going to continue with this relationship, and perhaps we might make this an annual engagement. Every year we have engagement of this nature, so that we can,
update to the revolution.
Yes, and see how far.
The Matrix
Revolution 2.0, 3.0.
Yes, and see how far we are. Maybe we'll come back next year as 5.0, going forward. But thank you very much for your engagement.
Thank you for hosting us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much to the students for participating and staying for this long. I know that you take this very serious, and you have learned a lot from this. And thank you very much for continuously engaging with us and keeping us on our toes in terms of what we should be engaging. And everybody who's involved in the background. Thank you very much, and goodbye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.